Story 1. The Sentinel's Promise. The distant rumble of the locomotive echoed through the abandoned rail yard as Mason Blackwood cut the engine of his weathered pickup truck. The heat of the New Mexico summer pressed down like a physical weight, making the air shimmer above the rusted tracks. Mason wiped sweat from his brow, his calloused hands rough against his sun-weathered skin. Behind him, 3 other trucks pulled into formation, their occupants, members of a salvage crew, stepping out into the scorching afternoon. "What's the plan, boss?" asked Dex, Mason's right-hand man, as he slammed his door shut. The hulking former wrestler adjusted his bandana, his tattooed arms glistening with sweat. Mason surveyed the sprawling rail yard. "Same as always. We salvage what we can before the demolition crew arrives next week. Railroad company doesn't care what happens to this place now." The crew had been working these kinds of jobs for years. Abandoned industrial sites, forgotten buildings, places society had deemed worthless. They moved like ghosts through America's discarded places, stripping copper wire, scrap metal, and anything else they could sell. It wasn't glamorous work, but it paid the bills, and it kept them free from the 9-to-5 grind they all despised. "Let's split up," Mason called to the group. "Check the old depot building first, then the maintenance shed. Remember, quick and quiet." The crew dispersed, tools in hand. Mason headed toward the main depot building, its windows broken and walls covered in graffiti. As he approached the sagging wooden structure, something caught his attention, a soft sound, almost imperceptible beneath the whisper of the hot desert wind. He paused, hand instinctively moving to the knife on his belt. The sound came again, a faint whimper, pained and desperate. "Hello," Mason called, feeling foolish as his voice echoed through the empty yard. The whimpering intensified, guiding him around the corner of the building. There, collapsed against a stack of rotting railroad ties, lay a large tan dog. Its coat was matted with dirt and blood, one leg clearly broken, bent at an unnatural angle. Despite its obvious pain, the dog lifted its head at Mason's approach, amber eyes alert and intelligent. "Easy there," Mason murmured, crouching down several feet away. The dog's collar caught his eye, a sturdy military-grade band with a small device attached. As Mason leaned closer, he could make out the embroidered patch on the dog's harness. "Search and rescue." This wasn't just any stray. This was a working dog, a trained professional. But what was it doing here, miles from civilization, badly injured and alone? The dog's eyes locked onto Mason's, and in that moment, something passed between them, a silent communication, a plea for help. Mason had spent years hardening himself against the world, building walls to keep others at a distance. But something about this dog's steady gaze broke through. "Dex," he called over his shoulder. "Get over here." Footsteps pounded against the gravel as Dex rounded the corner. "What's up, boss?" "Oh, shit." He stopped short at the sight of the injured animal. "We need to help him," Mason said, surprising himself with the conviction in his voice. Dex shifted uncomfortably. "Boss, we've got work to do. Can't we just call animal control or something?" Mason shook his head, already removing his jacket to create a makeshift stretcher. "No time. Look at him. He's lost a lot of blood." As if on cue, the distant wail of sirens cut through the hot afternoon air. Mason and Dex exchanged glances. "That's not for us, is it?" Dex asked, his voice tense. Their operation wasn't strictly legal, but they'd never had trouble with the law here before. Mason's eyes narrowed as the sirens grew louder. "I don't know, but I'm not leaving him." He gestured to the injured dog. "Help me get him to the truck." Carefully, they lifted the dog onto Mason's jacket. The animal whimpered but didn't struggle, seeming to understand they were trying to help. As they carried him toward the trucks, Mason noticed the device on the dog's collar was a small camera, its red light still blinking steadily. "Hey, boss," Dex said quietly. "That camera's recording." Mason nodded, suddenly understanding. Whatever happened to this dog is on that footage, and whoever did this might not want that getting out. The sirens were getting closer now, their wail bouncing off the empty buildings. The rest of the crew emerged from various structures, tools in hand, expressions questioning. "Change of plans," Mason called to them. "We're leaving. Now." "What about the job?" someone asked. "Job's off," Mason replied, carefully placing the injured dog in the bed of his truck. "Something bigger's come up." The crew scrambled to their vehicles as the first police car appeared at the entrance to the rail yard, lights flashing. Mason climbed into his truck and started the engine, his heart pounding. The dog lay in the truck bed, its eyes still fixed on Mason through the rear window. "Hang in there, buddy," Mason muttered as they pulled away, taking a back exit he'd scouted earlier. In the rearview mirror, he watched the police cars stop at the main entrance, officers emerging with weapons drawn. Dex's truck followed close behind as they sped down a dirt road, heading away from town. "Where are we going?" he asked over the two-way radio. Mason considered for a moment. "The old factory. We need somewhere quiet to figure this out." The old factory was an abandoned manufacturing plant 30 miles outside of town, a place the crew used occasionally for storage and as a temporary base of operations. It was secluded, hard to find unless you knew where to look. As they drove, Mason's mind raced. Why would police be after a search and rescue dog? The camera was the key. Whatever had recorded must be important, or dangerous. When they reached the factory, the sun was beginning to set, painting the desert in shades of orange and deep purple. The crew gathered around Mason's truck, eyeing the injured dog with a mixture of curiosity and concern. "What's the plan, boss?" Dex asked as they carefully lifted the dog from the truck bed. "First, we help him," Mason replied firmly. "Jenna, you did that vet tech training, right?" A woman with short, dyed blue hair stepped forward, nodding. 2 years before I dropped out. I can stabilize him, but he needs real medical attention." "Do what you can," Mason said. "The rest of you, secure the perimeter. I don't think we were followed, but I'm not taking chances." As the crew dispersed, Mason carried the dog into the factory's old office area. Jenna followed, already opening the first aid kit they kept on site. The dog remained remarkably calm as they set him down on a makeshift bed of old blankets, his amber eyes tracking their movements. "He's trained," Jenna observed as she examined his injuries. "Military or police dogs are taught to stay still during medical treatment." Mason nodded, studying the dog's collar. "Search and rescue. But why would anyone want to hurt a search and rescue dog?" Carefully, he unfastened the small camera from the collar. It was a sturdy, waterproof model, designed to withstand rough conditions. A quick inspection revealed a small button on the side that presumably would play back recorded footage. "Let's see what you've been through," Mason murmured, pressing the button. The footage began playing, the image shaky as the dog moved. It showed a rocky terrain, a canyon or ravine, with a man in a search and rescue uniform walking ahead. The man occasionally looked back, giving hand signals to the dog. There was no audio, but it was clear they were on some kind of mission. Then the scene changed abruptly. The dog and his handler were approaching what looked like a small plane, crashed in a remote area. As they got closer, the handler stopped, signaling the dog to stay. He approached the wreckage cautiously, then disappeared inside. Moments later, the footage became chaotic. The dog suddenly lunged forward, camera bouncing wildly as he ran toward the plane. There were flashes, gunshots, and the handler stumbled out, collapsing to the ground. More figures emerged from the plane, faces covered with bandanas. One pointed directly at the camera, at the dog, and more flashes erupted. The footage showed the dog retreating, clearly injured but still running. The last clear image was of the handler, motionless on the ground, before the dog fled into the wilderness. Mason stared at the small screen, his jaw tight. "Son of a bitch," he muttered. He witnessed a murder. Jenna looked up from bandaging the dog's leg, her face pale. "The handler?" Mason nodded grimly. "Looks like they found something they weren't supposed to. A down plane. Maybe smugglers or drug runners. They killed the handler and tried to kill the dog too. But he got away," Jenna said, gently stroking the dog's head. "And now they're hunting him to destroy the evidence. Which means they'll be hunting us too, once they realize we have him," Mason added, pocketing the camera. "We need to get this footage to the authorities." Jenna laughed bitterly. "Since when do we trust the cops? For all we know, they could be involved." Mason had to admit she had a point. In their line of work, Law enforcement was typically the enemy, not an ally. But this was different. A man had been murdered, and this dog was the only witness. "We need to know who to trust," he said finally. "And for that, we need more information." Outside, the sound of an approaching vehicle made them both tense. Mason moved to the window, peering through the broken blinds. Dex's truck had returned. He'd sent him to get supplies from town. "It's Dex," Mason confirmed, relaxing slightly. Moments later, Dex burst through the door, his face flushed with urgency. "We've got trouble," he announced. "News is all over town about a missing search and rescue team. Official story is they were on a training exercise when they lost contact." "Training exercise," Mason repeated skeptically. "That crash site didn't look like any training I've ever seen." "Gets worse," Dex continued. "I overheard some guys at the gas station, private security types, not cops. They were asking questions about a missing dog, offering cash for information. They're searching the area where we found him." Mason's mind raced. How long before they connect the dots and head this way? Dex shrugged. "We were careful, but it won't take them forever." The dog whimpered softly, drawing their attention. Despite his injuries, he was trying to stand, his good legs trembling with the effort. "Easy, boy," Mason said, kneeling beside him. "You're safe here." The dog's eyes locked onto Mason's again, that same intense, intelligent gaze. Mason felt something stir inside him, a protectiveness he hadn't experienced in years. "He needs a name," Jenna said, checking the bandages. "We can't just keep calling him Dog." Mason studied the animal for a moment. "Sentinel," he decided. That's what he was doing, standing watch, bearing witness. "Sentinel," Jenna repeated, nodding. "I like it." Outside, the desert night had fully descended, stars bright in the clear sky. Mason stood by the window, scanning the darkness, his mind working through their options. They couldn't stay here indefinitely, but moving Sentinel in his condition wasn't ideal. And eventually, whoever was after him would track them down. "We need to know who these people are," he said finally. "The only way out of this is through." Dex, who had been checking the perimeter, returned with a laptop. "Might help with that," he said, placing it on a dusty desk. "Borrowed it from the supply run." Mason raised an eyebrow. "Borrowed?" Dex grinned. "Figure of speech, boss." Using the laptop, they connected the camera and downloaded the footage, examining it more carefully frame by frame. The crash plane's tail had a partial registration number visible in one shot. "Can we track that?" Mason asked. Jenna, who had the most technical knowledge of the group, nodded slowly. "Maybe. I know someone who might be able to help. An ex who works in aviation. But it's risky to reach out." Mason weighed their options. "Do it. We need answers." While Jenna made the call, Mason sat beside Sentinel, gently stroking his fur. The dog had finally relaxed enough to sleep, his breathing steady but shallow. "We'll figure this out," Mason promised quietly. "Whoever did this to you and your partner, they won't get away with it." Dawn was breaking when Jenna returned, her expression grim but determined. "Got something," she announced. "The plane was reported stolen 3 days ago from a private airfield in Arizona. It belongs to a company called Summit Security Solutions." "Never heard of them," Dex said, looking up from where he'd been dozing in a corner. "That's because they don't want you to," Jenna replied. "They're a private military contractor, the kind that does the dirty work governments don't want to admit to. My contact says they're bad news." Mason frowned. "So what's their stolen plane doing crashed in the New Mexico desert?" "That's the interesting part," Jenna continued. "Rumor has it they've been moving something valuable through this area. My contact wouldn't say what, but reading between the lines, it could be weapons, could be drugs, could be people. And somehow a search and rescue team stumbled onto one of their operations," Mason concluded. "Wrong place, wrong time." "So what do we do?" Dex asked, standing and stretching. "We're talking about professionals here, not some local thugs." Mason looked down at Sentinel, who had awakened and was watching him intently. "We do the right thing," he said firmly. "We get this evidence to someone who can use it." "Like who?" Jenna challenged. The local cops. The state police? How do we know they're not on Summit's payroll? It was a valid question. In their experience, power and corruption often went hand in hand. But Mason had been thinking about this all night. There's a journalist, he said slowly. Elena Vasquez. She broke that story last year about corruption in the Border Patrol. She's legit, doesn't back down, doesn't sell out. Dex looked skeptical. You want to trust a reporter? I want to trust someone who has as much interest in exposing these people as we do, Mason replied. If this Summit group is as connected as they seem, our best protection is making this story too public to bury. Before anyone could respond, Sentinel suddenly lifted his head, ears alert. A low growl rumbled in his chest. Mason tensed, moving to the window. In the early morning light, he could make out dust clouds on the horizon, vehicles approaching. We've got company, he announced, his voice tight. 3, maybe 4 vehicles. Dex peered over his shoulder. Summit's goons. Probably. We need to move. Now. The crew sprang into action, grabbing essential supplies and weapons. Mason carefully lifted Sentinel, who seemed stronger after a night's rest, but was still in no condition to run. Back exit, Mason directed, to the emergency vehicles. The emergency vehicles were 2 old dirt bikes and an ATV they kept hidden in a shed behind the factory. Transportation designed for quick escapes across terrain where cars couldn't follow. It wasn't ideal for transporting an injured dog, but they were out of options. As they hurried toward the back of the building, the sound of vehicles grew louder. Mason glanced back to see 3 black SUVs pulling up to the factory entrance. Men in tactical gear emerging with weapons drawn. They're not even pretending to be cops, Dex muttered as they reached the shed. Mason secured Sentinel in a carrier attached to the ATV, making sure the dog was as comfortable and stable as possible. Jenna, you take the ATV with Sentinel. Head for the canyon. There's a place to hide there. Dex and I will create a diversion, then meet you at the old trading post by nightfall. Jenna nodded, climbing onto the ATV. What about the others? She asked, referring to the rest of their crew, most of whom had left during the night. They're on their own, Mason replied grimly. They know the drill. The sound of boots on gravel alerted them that Summit's men were surrounding the building. Time was up. Go, Mason urged, and Jenna started the ATV, speeding away toward the canyon. Mason and Dex mounted the dirt bikes, heading in the opposite direction. As expected, several of the armed men gave chase, splitting their forces. Mason led them on a wild pursuit through the desert, using his knowledge of the terrain to stay just ahead of their pursuers. Desert dust choked the air as they raced across the landscape, the morning sun climbing higher in the sky. After miles of chase, Mason finally lost the last of his pursuers in a maze-like formation of rock outcroppings. Circling back cautiously, he met up with Dex at their predetermined rendezvous point. Think they followed Jenna? Dex asked, breathing hard. Mason shook his head. Don't think so. Most of them came after us. But we need to move fast. They'll regroup and expand their search. They rode hard toward the trading post, an abandoned tourist trap from the 1950s that now served as another of their occasional hideouts. By the time they arrived, the sun was setting, painting the desert in fiery hues. Jenna was already there, Sentinel resting beside her. The dog looked up as Mason approached, his tail thumping weakly against the ground. He's tough, Jenna reported. Fever's down, and he ate a little. Mason crouched down, gently scratching behind Sentinel's ears. Good boy, he murmured. You're going to make it. For the first time, Sentinel's mouth opened in what almost looked like a dog smile, his tongue lolling to one side. Despite everything, Mason found himself smiling back. I made contact with Elena Vasquez, Jenna announced. She's interested but cautious. Says she'll meet us tomorrow at a place of her choosing. That's something at least, Mason replied, standing again. We just need to lie low until then. But staying hidden proved harder than anticipated. Throughout the night, they spotted search parties in the distance, vehicles with spotlights sweeping the desert, helicopters circling with searchlights. Summit was pulling out all the stops to find them. They really want this dog, Dex observed grimly, as they watched from the darkened trading post. "They want the evidence he carries," Mason corrected, "and they want to tie up loose ends." By morning, they knew staying put wasn't an option. The search pattern was tightening, methodically covering the area. It was only a matter of time before they were discovered. "We need to split up," Mason decided. "I'll take Sentinel to meet Vasquez. You two head in different directions, create confusion, then make your way to the backup rendezvous at the old mining camp." Dex and Jenna exchanged glances, clearly not liking the plan but understanding its necessity. "Be careful, boss," Dex said seriously. "These guys play for keeps." Mason nodded, helping Sentinel into the passenger seat of an old Jeep they'd stashed at the trading post. The dog seemed stronger today, more alert, though his injured leg was still wrapped tightly. As the first light of dawn broke over the desert, they parted ways, Jenna heading north, Dex south, and Mason east toward the meeting point Vasquez had specified, an old church on the outskirts of the nearest town. The drive was tense, every passing vehicle a potential threat. Beside him, Sentinel sat upright, his gaze fixed on the road ahead, occasionally turning to look at Mason as if checking that he was still there. "Almost there, buddy," Mason assured him, reaching over to pat his head. "Almost there." The church appeared on the horizon, a small adobe structure with a simple bell tower. It looked abandoned, which was likely why Vasquez had chosen it, isolated, with good visibility in all directions. Mason parked the Jeep behind the building and helped Sentinel out, the dog limping but determined to walk under his own power. Together, they entered through a side door, finding the interior cool and dim after the brightness outside. A woman stood near the altar, her back to them. She turned as they entered, revealing a face Mason recognized from news broadcasts, Elena Vasquez, her dark hair pulled back, her expression cautious, but curious. "Mr. Blackwood," she said, her voice even, "and this must be the witness I've heard about." Sentinel limped forward, seeming to assess the newcomer. After a moment, he relaxed, apparently deciding she wasn't a threat. "He's got quite a story to tell," Mason replied, patting the camera in his pocket. "So do I." Vasquez gestured to a pew. "Then let's hear it. From the beginning." Mason began recounting everything, from finding Sentinel to discovering the footage, to being pursued by Summit's forces. Vasquez listened intently, occasionally taking notes, but mostly just absorbing the information. When he finished, she spoke carefully. "You understand what you're saying, that a private military contractor murdered a search and rescue worker to cover up some kind of illegal operation and is now hunting down witnesses." "That's exactly what I'm saying," Mason confirmed. "And I've got the evidence right here." He handed over the camera. Vasquez took it, examining it briefly before connecting it to her laptop. She watched the footage in silence, her expression darkening. "This is explosive," she said finally, "but also dangerous. Summit has powerful friends, government contracts." "Which is why we came to you," Mason replied. "This needs to go public in a way they can't contain or cover up." She nodded slowly. "I'll need to authenticate this, get some independent verification. And I'll need to keep the dog safe. He's a material witness." "Sentinel," Mason corrected automatically. "His name is Sentinel." Vasquez smiled slightly. "Sentinel, then. I have contacts who can help, people I trust. There's a veterinarian who works with a wildlife sanctuary about an hour from here. He's discreet and can provide proper medical care." As they discussed logistics, Sentinel suddenly stiffened. His ears perked forward. A low growl rumbled in his chest. Mason immediately tensed, moving to the window. "We've got trouble," he said, spotting black SUVs approaching on the dusty road. "They found us." Vasquez moved quickly, gathering her equipment. "There's a back way out. My car's parked behind the cemetery." But they were too late. The doors of the church burst open, and armed men flooded in, weapons raised. At their center stood a tall man with close-cropped silver hair and cold, calculating eyes, clearly the leader. "Mr. Blackwood," he said smoothly, "you've led us on quite a chase. All for a dog." His tone was conversational, but his eyes were hard as steel. Mason stepped in front of Sentinel, who was now growling continuously. Not just a dog. A witness to murder. The man sighed as if disappointed. Such dramatic language. There was an unfortunate incident, yes. A misunderstanding. But nothing that warrants this crusade you've embarked upon. Tell that to the search and rescue worker your men gunned down. Mason replied coldly. The leader's expression hardened. That footage you have, it doesn't tell the whole story. The situation was complex. National security was at stake. Is that what you tell yourselves? Vasquez interjected, her voice steady despite the guns pointed in her direction. That murder is justified for national security? The man turned his attention to her, his eyes narrowing in recognition. Ms. Vasquez, I should have known. Always chasing stories better left untold. The public deserves to know the truth, she replied firmly. He laughed, a sound devoid of humor. The public deserves safety and security, which is what we provide. Sometimes that requires difficult decisions. As he spoke, Mason noticed Sentinel had stopped growling. Instead, the dog was perfectly still, his eyes fixed on something, or someone, behind the leader. Following his gaze, Mason spotted a figure at the back of the group, a man whose posture had suddenly changed, becoming rigid with recognition. Sentinel let out a single, sharp bark, and the man flinched visibly. The leader turned, annoyed by the interruption. What is it, Jenkins? But Jenkins wasn't looking at his boss. He was staring at Sentinel, his face drained of color. Sir, he said hoarsely, that's the same dog. From the crash site, the one that... He trailed off, but the damage was done. The leader's expression darkened with understanding. The one that saw you shoot the handler, he finished coldly. The church fell silent. Jenkins swallowed hard, suddenly aware of what he'd revealed. Sir, Enough! The leader cut him off. We'll discuss your indiscretion later. He turned back to Mason and Vasquez, his expression hardening. It seems we have a complication. But the moment of confusion had given Mason the opening he needed. With a subtle hand signal, one he'd learned from watching Sentinel's handler in the footage, he commanded, Down! Sentinel immediately dropped to the floor, and in the same motion, Mason lunged forward, tackling the leader. Chaos erupted as Vasquez used a distraction to deploy a concealed canister of pepper spray, temporarily blinding several of the armed men. Gunshots rang out, bullets splintering the wooden pews. Mason grappled with the leader, both men fighting for control. Despite his injuries, Sentinel joined the fray, clamping his powerful jaws around the arm of a man aiming at Mason. The sound of sirens cut through the chaos, distant at first, then rapidly approaching. Vasquez had managed to trigger a silent alarm when the men first entered. Police, a voice boomed from outside. Drop your weapons and exit with your hands up. The leader's eyes widened with genuine surprise, then narrowed in cold calculation. This isn't over, he hissed at Mason before shouting to his men. Withdraw. Now. The summit operatives began a tactical retreat, backing toward a side exit. Jenkins, however, stood frozen, his gaze locked on Sentinel. The dog growled, advancing despite his injured leg. In a desperate move, Jenkins raised his weapon again, aiming not at Mason or Vasquez, but at Sentinel. No loose ends, he muttered. Mason saw the movement and shouted a warning, but it was Vasquez who reacted fastest, throwing herself into Jenkins and knocking his aim off. The bullet went wide, splintering a wooden beam. Before Jenkins could recover, the church doors burst open, and police officers flooded in, weapons drawn. Summit's men scattered, some escaping through windows and side doors, others, including Jenkins, finding themselves surrounded and forced to surrender. In the aftermath, as paramedics tended to minor injuries and police secured the scene, Mason sat on the steps of the church, Sentinel resting beside him. The dog's head lay heavy on Mason's leg, his eyes half closed in exhaustion but still watchful. Vasquez approached, a bandage on her arm where a bullet had grazed her. Your dog is a hero, she said, sitting down beside them. He's not my dog, Mason replied automatically, then looked down at Sentinel, who was gazing up at him with those intelligent amber eyes. Or maybe he is now. I don't know. The police found the crash site, Vasquez continued, and they've recovered the handler's body. Ballistics should match Jenkins' weapon. Between that and the footage, we've got them. Mason nodded, still absently stroking Sentinel's fur. And the rest? The leader. Vasquez's expression tightened. In the wind for now. But his organization is exposed. I've already filed my initial report, and it's running on the front page of every major news outlet. Summit's government contracts are being suspended pending investigation. For the first time in days, Mason felt the tension in his shoulders begin to ease. So it's over? This part is, she confirmed. There will be trials, investigations. I'll need both of you to testify. She glanced at Sentinel. Well, maybe just you. Mason found himself smiling despite everything. He's pretty good at making his point known. A police officer approached, looking somewhat uncomfortable. Mr. Blackwood? We need to talk about some of your prior activities. Mason tensed again, but Vasquez intervened. Officer, Mr. Blackwood and his associates have just helped break open a major case involving corruption and murder at the highest levels. I think that earns them a certain consideration, don't you? The officer hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. We'll be in touch, he said before withdrawing. Thank you, Mason said quietly to Vasquez. She shrugged. You did the right thing when it mattered. That counts for something in my book. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the churchyard, Mason looked down at Sentinel again. The dog had finally fallen into a deep sleep, his breathing steady and strong. What happens to him now? Mason asked. Vasquez studied them both for a moment. Technically, he belongs to the search and rescue unit, but given the circumstances and his injuries. She trailed off, then smiled. I think arrangements could be made for a medical retirement. He'd need a good home, though. Someone who understands what he's been through. Mason ran his hand gently over Sentinel's head, feeling the soft fur between his fingers. For years, he'd avoided attachments, connections, commitments of any kind. It was easier that way, safer. But something had changed when he'd found Sentinel in that rail yard. A recognition, perhaps, of another soul who had witnessed darkness, but refused to be defined by it. Yeah, Mason said finally, his voice rough with emotion he rarely allowed himself to show. I think I know someone who might be interested in that job. Sentinel's eyes opened briefly, meeting Mason's gaze with that same intelligent, knowing look. Then, with what almost seemed like a contented sigh, he settled back into sleep, trusting completely in the protection of his newfound guardian. In the gathering dusk, as police lights flashed and reporters gathered at the perimeter, Mason made a silent promise, to Sentinel, to himself, to the handler who had lost his life. The truth would be told, justice would be served, and neither of them would ever have to face the darkness alone again. Story 2. Shadow's Promise. The autumn wind carried a bitter chill as Detective Marcus Reeves adjusted his collar against the growing darkness. Beside him, Shadow, his Belgian Malinois K9 partner, sat alert in the passenger seat of their unmarked vehicle, amber eyes scanning the dilapidated apartment complex ahead of them. You feel it too, don't you, boy? Marcus murmured, reaching over to stroke Shadow's dark fur. The dog's ears twitched in response, his body tense with anticipation. The call had come in 20 minutes ago. Suspected drug manufacturing operation. Possible armed suspects. 4th floor of the Westwood Heights complex. A place once filled with families now stood as a hollow shell of its former self, abandoned to the mercy of those who operated in the shadows. Unit 27, be advised, backup is still 15 minutes out. Proceed with extreme caution. The dispatcher's voice crackled over the radio. Marcus exhaled slowly. Just you and me then, Shadow. The dog gave a low rumble in response, ready as always. The night enveloped them as they approached the building, each step calculated. Shadow moved silently beside Marcus, his training evident in every precise movement. The main entrance had long since lost its door, leaving a gaping mouth that seemed to exhale decay. Inside, the stairwell was illuminated only by the weak beam of Marcus's flashlight, revealing graffiti-covered walls and discarded needles. They ascended carefully, Shadow leading the way, nose working constantly, processing information invisible to human senses. As they reached the 3rd floor landing, Shadow suddenly stopped, his body freezing mid-step. Marcus immediately halted, years of partnership having taught him to trust the dog's instincts without question. Then he heard it, a faint metallic click from somewhere above. Shadow's ears pivoted forward, his muscles coiling with alertness. Marcus drew his weapon, adrenaline sharpening his senses. With a hand signal, he directed Shadow to hold position as he edged forward, pressing himself against the wall. The fourth floor landing appeared empty, but Shadow's rigid posture told a different story. With another subtle gesture, Marcus sent Shadow forward to investigate. The dog moved like liquid shadow, approaching a door with a fractured number 407 hanging loosely from its center. Seconds stretched into eternity as Shadow circled the doorway, sniffing methodically. Then he froze, looking back at Marcus with unmistakable certainty. Marcus nodded, raising his radio to quietly request status on their backup. Before he could press the button, the world erupted into chaos. The apartment door burst open, and a figure lunged out, colliding with Shadow. The dog reacted instantly, powerful jaws clamping onto the assailant's arm. A scream tore through the stale air as Marcus moved forward, weapon raised. "Police! Don't move!" he shouted, but his words were swallowed by the sudden explosion of gunfire from inside the apartment. Searing pain ripped through Marcus's right shoulder, spinning him backward against the wall. His vision blurred, but he caught sight of Shadow releasing his first target to dart toward the new threat emerging from the doorway. Through the haze of pain, Marcus tried to raise his weapon, but his arm wouldn't respond. "Shadow!" he gasped, blood seeping between the fingers of his left hand as he clutched his wound. The world seemed to slow as a second man appeared in the doorway, weapon raised toward Marcus. Shadow launched through the air in a blur of fur and determination, a guardian angel with fangs and claws. The impact knocked the gunman backward, his shot going wide as Shadow drove him to the ground. Marcus struggled to stay conscious, fumbling for his radio with blood-slicked fingers. "Officer down, 4th floor." "Shadow." The words felt thick in his mouth as darkness crept into the edges of his vision. The last thing he saw before consciousness slipped away was Shadow standing guard over him, hackles raised, a low growl emanating from deep in his chest as faces appeared at the end of the hallway. The steady beep of hospital machinery pulled Marcus back to consciousness. The sterile white ceiling swam into focus as he blinked away the fog of medication. "Welcome back to the land of the living, detective." The voice belonged to Captain Ellis, a granite-faced veteran with 30 years on the force. Marcus tried to speak, but his throat felt like sandpaper. Ellis handed him a cup of water, helping him take a sip. "Shadow," Marcus managed to rasp. Ellis's expression softened slightly. "Your partner's fine. Took a graze to his flank, but you know how tough those Malinois are. He's currently driving the K9 unit handlers crazy, trying to escape to come find you." Relief washed over Marcus, but it was quickly replaced by confusion. "What happened? The suspects. You don't remember?" Ellis pulled a chair closer to the bed. "After you went down, Shadow held those two perps at bay until backup arrived. Wouldn't let anyone near you. Not even the first officers on scene. They had to call an Officer Ramirez from K9 to talk him down." Ellis shook his head in amazement. "That dog of yours is something else, Reeves." Marcus felt a swell of pride through the pain. "The operation? Bigger than we thought. Your hunch was right. It wasn't just a drug manufacturing operation. We found evidence linking these guys to a distribution network spanning 3 states. Shadow discovered a hidden compartment in the apartment wall containing detailed records, weapon caches, and nearly $2 million in cash." Ellis leaned forward, his voice dropping. "This could be the break we've been looking for in the Carson case." The Carson case, a 3-year investigation into one of the largest drug trafficking operations on the East Coast. Marcus had been chasing shadows and whispers for months, and now, because of Shadow, they finally had something tangible. "When can I see him?" Marcus asked. Ellis stood up. "The doc says you're lucky. Clean shot through. Missed anything vital. They want to keep you for observation another day or 2. He checked his watch. "I sent Ramirez to bring Shadow by for a visit this afternoon. Figured it might keep both of you from tearing this place apart." After Ellis left, Marcus drifted in and out of sleep, his dreams filled with echoing gunshots and Shadow's unwavering loyalty. He was awakened by the unmistakable sound of nails clicking on linoleum. Officer Ramirez appeared in the doorway, struggling to control the excited Malinois, straining at his leash. "I think someone's happy to see you, Detective." The moment Shadow laid eyes on Marcus, the dog let out a whine of recognition. Ramirez unclipped the leash, and Shadow bounded to the bedside, careful despite his excitement. His front paws delicately rested on the edge of the mattress as he stretched forward to nudge Marcus's hand with his nose. "Hey, buddy," Marcus whispered, his voice thick with emotion as he stroked the dog's head. Shadow leaned into the touch, his amber eyes never leaving Marcus's face. The bandage on Shadow's flank was barely visible against his dark fur. "The vet said he's fine," Ramirez assured him, "but good luck keeping him on rest once he's home. He's been driving everyone at the precinct crazy." Marcus smiled weakly. "Sounds about right." After Ramirez left, Shadow settled on the floor beside the bed, his head resting protectively near Marcus's hand. The connection between them transcended words, a partnership forged through danger and trust. "Thank you," Marcus whispered, running his fingers through Shadow's fur. The dog's eyes closed contentedly, but his ears remained alert, ever vigilant even in moments of peace. 2 weeks later, Marcus stood in Captain Ellis's office, Shadow sitting attentively at his side. His arm rested in a sling, a constant reminder of how close he'd come to death. "The intel we gathered from the apartment has led to 3 more arrests," Ellis explained, spreading photographs across his desk. "But we've hit a wall with the Carson connection. The suspects aren't talking, and the documents, while incriminating, don't give us a direct link to Carson himself." Marcus studied the photos, frustration building. They were so close. "There's one lead," Ellis continued, pulling out a map marked with several locations. "Based on the shipping schedules we found, we believe there's a major delivery happening tonight at the old Blackwood Industrial Park. It could be our chance to catch someone higher up the chain." Marcus straightened. "I want in." Ellis frowned. "You're still on medical leave, Reeves." "I'm fine," Marcus insisted, though the throb in his shoulder suggested otherwise. "And Shadow and I know this case better than anyone." Ellis studied him for a long moment. "Surveillance only," he finally conceded. "You stay in the van with tech support. Shadow stays with you. I'm not risking either of you getting killed on my watch." Marcus wanted to argue, but knew it was the best offer he would get. "Understood." The Blackwood Industrial Park loomed against the night sky, a graveyard of abandoned factories and warehouses. The surveillance van was parked half a mile away, offering a clear view of the main entrance through specialized cameras. Marcus sat beside tech specialist Zhang, studying the multiple screens while Shadow lay at his feet, occasionally lifting his head to sniff the air flowing through the partially open window. "Movement at the east entrance," Zhang reported, zooming in one of the cameras. A black SUV with tinted windows pulled up to a loading dock, its headlights cutting through the darkness. Marcus leaned forward, wincing as his shoulder protested. "That's not on any of the schedules we found." Zhang nodded, relaying the information to the tactical team positioned around the perimeter. On another screen, Marcus could see officers moving into position, keeping to the shadows. 3 men emerged from the SUV, each carrying automatic weapons. They scanned the area before one spoke into a radio. Minutes later, a truck appeared, backing up to the loading dock. "Something's not right," Marcus muttered. Shadow sensed his tension, rising to his feet with a low whine. The radio crackled. "Command, we have multiple armed subjects. Proceeding with caution." Marcus watched as the tactical team began their approach, moving with practiced precision. Then Shadow's demeanor changed dramatically. His body stiffened, ears flat against his head, a growl building in his throat. "What is it, boy?" Marcus asked, immediately alert. Shadow barked sharply, pawing at the van door. Zhang looked concerned. "What's wrong with him?" "He senses something we don't," Marcus replied, reaching for the radio. "All units, be advised, possible additional threat. My K9 is indicating danger." Before he could elaborate, gunfire erupted on the screens. The tactical team had been ambushed, additional gunmen appearing from positions not visible to the surveillance cameras. It's a trap, Marcus realized with horror. He grabbed his weapon, adrenaline overpowering the pain in his shoulder. Zhang called for backup. All available units. Where are you going? Zhang demanded as Marcus opened the van door. Captain Ellis said. Those are our people out there. Marcus cut him off. Shadow was already at his side, ready as always. Stay here and coordinate. We're going to circle around to the west entrance. There's a service tunnel that connects to the main building. We can use it to flank the ambush. Before Zhang could protest further, Marcus and Shadow disappeared into the darkness, moving swiftly away from the gunfire. The night air carried the scent of cordite and fear as they navigated through the industrial wasteland. Shadow led the way, his training and instincts guiding them through the maze of abandoned structures. They reached the west entrance, a rusted door hanging partially off its hinges, and slipped inside. The service tunnel was pitch black, forcing Marcus to use his flashlight despite the risk. Shadow moved confidently ahead, his paws silent on the concrete floor. The distant sound of gunfire echoed through the tunnel, creating a disorienting effect. Easy, boy, Marcus whispered as they approached a junction. Shadow paused, nose working overtime, then turned left without hesitation. Marcus followed, trusting his partner implicitly. The tunnel opened into a vast warehouse space. Crates were stacked along the walls, and catwalks crisscrossed the ceiling. Marcus could hear the gunfight more clearly now. It was happening just beyond the far wall. Shadow suddenly froze, his attention locked on a shadowy figure moving along the upper catwalk. Marcus doused his flashlight, pressing himself against a crate as he strained to make out details in the darkness. The figure was carrying something large, a rifle with an unusual profile. With a jolt of realization, Marcus recognized it as a high-powered sniper rifle with thermal imaging. The ambusher was planning to pick off the tactical team from his elevated position. Marcus quickly assessed his options. His shoulder made climbing to the catwalk nearly impossible, and calling for backup would alert the sniper to their presence. He looked at Shadow, an idea forming. Crouching down, he gave Shadow a series of hand signals, commands they had practiced countless times, but never deployed in quite this way. Shadow's ears perked forward, understanding evident in his intelligent eyes. Marcus pointed to the ladder leading to the catwalk, then made the signal for go silent. Shadow moved like a ghost, slipping between crates and finding a path that would take him to a different access point to the catwalk. Marcus circled in the opposite direction, positioning himself where he could see the sniper but remain hidden. The sniper was focused entirely on setting up a shot, unaware of the approaching threat. Shadow reached the catwalk, his paws making no sound on the metal grating as he stalked forward. When he was within striking distance, Marcus gave a sharp whistle. The sniper spun around, but it was too late. Shadow launched himself forward, a furry missile of muscle and determination. The impact sent both dog and man crashing against the railing. The rifle clattered to the warehouse floor as the sniper struggled against Shadow's powerful jaws, which were clamped firmly on his arm. Marcus emerged from cover, weapon trained on the subdued sniper. Police, don't move. The man froze, eyes wide with terror as Shadow maintained his grip, growling low in his throat. Good boy, Shadow, Marcus called up, relief flooding his system. He activated his radio. This is Detective Reeves. I have one suspect in custody in the West Warehouse. Sniper, armed with thermal rifle. Send a team to secure. As he waited for backup, Marcus kept his weapon trained on the sniper, even though Shadow had the situation well under control. The sound of gunfire outside had diminished, suggesting the tactical team was gaining the upper hand now that their hidden adversary had been neutralized. You and your damn dog. The sniper spat, blood seeping through his sleeve where Shadow's teeth had penetrated. You have no idea what you've stepped into. Why don't you enlighten me? Marcus suggested coldly. The man laughed, a hollow sound that echoed in the empty warehouse. Carson's operation goes deeper than you can imagine. There are people involved that you'd never suspect. People who'll make sure I never see the inside of a courtroom. A chill ran down Marcus's spine. We'll see about that. Footsteps echoed through the tunnel as backup arrived. 2 officers secured the sniper, carefully extracting him from Shadow's unyielding grip only after Marcus gave the command to release. Shadow immediately returned to Marcus's side, pressing against his leg as if sensing his unease. Captain Ellis appeared, his expression a mixture of fury and relief. "I told you to stay in the van." "Good thing I didn't," Marcus replied, nodding toward the sniper being led away. "He would have taken out half the tactical team with that thermal scope." Ellis sighed, the fight going out of him. "The operation's secure. We've got 7 suspects in custody and enough evidence to put Carson away for life, if we can find him." He looked down at Shadow, who sat attentively beside Marcus. "Though I suspect your partner there might be the key to that, too." Marcus crouched down, wincing at the pain in his shoulder as he rubbed Shadow's ears. "What do you think, boy? Ready to find the big fish?" Shadow's tail swished against the concrete, his amber eyes gleaming with what could only be described as determination. The evidence recovered from the warehouse raid provided the crucial link they needed. Documents, communication logs, and financial records painted a clear picture of Carson's operation. But the man himself remained elusive, protected by layers of secrecy and loyal lieutenants who refused to talk. 3 days after the raid, Marcus sat at his desk reviewing files, Shadow dozing at his feet. His shoulder ached, a constant reminder of his brush with death. The precinct hummed with activity around them, detectives and officers processing the mountain of evidence from the Blackwood operation. Officer Ramirez approached, carrying a thick folder. "Thought you might want to see this, Detective. K-9 unit just finished searching Carson's known associates' properties. Nothing significant turned up, but Shadow's littermate, Rex, flagged something interesting at the property belonging to Carson's brother-in-law." Marcus accepted the folder, curiosity piqued. Inside were photographs of a seemingly ordinary garden shed. "What am I looking at?" Rex kept alerting to this shed, but the team couldn't find anything unusual. No drugs, no weapons, nothing illegal. They were about to move on when the handler noticed something odd about the floor. Marcus flipped to the next photo, which showed the shed's floor partially removed, revealing a small, empty safe. They'd cleared it out already. Ramirez nodded, but not completely. "Rex found this." He handed Marcus a small evidence bag containing a business card. It bore only a name, Marina del Rey, and a stylized lighthouse logo. Marcus studied the card, his mind racing. Marina del Rey isn't a person. It's a location, a harbor south of Los Angeles. "That's what we thought too," Ramirez agreed. "But here's where it gets interesting. There's no marina or harbor business with that lighthouse logo. We checked." Marcus looked down at Shadow, who had awakened and was watching him intently. "What do you think this means, boy?" Shadow tilted his head, ears perked forward as if considering the question. An idea struck Marcus. What if it's not a business? What if it's a boat name? Within hours, they had confirmation. The Marina del Rey was a 65-foot yacht registered to a shell corporation that, through layers of paperwork, connected back to Carson's brother-in-law. Its home port was indeed Marina del Rey, but according to harbor records, it had left 3 days ago, immediately after the warehouse raid. "He's running," Marcus told Captain Ellis as they stood in the Situation Room, maps spread across the table. Shadow sat alertly beside them, seeming to understand the urgency of the moment. Carson was tipped off about the raid. He's on that yacht, trying to get to international waters. Ellis studied the nautical charts. Coast Guard is already on alert. They're tracking all vessels leaving Southern California ports in the last 72 hours. He looked up at Marcus, but finding one yacht in the Pacific Ocean. "We need to narrow it down," Marcus agreed. Carson wouldn't head straight out to sea. He'd have a destination in mind. Shadow suddenly stood, moving to the map table. His nose touched a specific point on the chart, a small island off the coast of Mexico. Marcus stared at his partner, then at the location Shadow had indicated. Isla de los Secretos. Small, privately owned. Minimal law enforcement presence. He looked up at Ellis. "It's perfect for someone looking to disappear." Ellis raised an eyebrow. "Your dog reads maps now, Reeves?" "He might not read maps," Marcus replied with a small smile. But he recognized his sense. 2 months ago, Shadow and I were present when evidence from one of Carson's lieutenants was processed. There were travel documents for Isla de los Secretos among them. Ellis shook his head in amazement, but didn't argue. I'll contact Coast Guard and Mexican authorities. If the Marina del Rey is heading there, we'll intercept. The Coast Guard cutter sliced through the waves, its powerful engines driving it south, toward Mexican waters. Marcus stood on the deck, the sea spray mixing with the early morning mist as Shadow sat beside him, seemingly unperturbed by the ocean voyage. "We've got a contact," announced Lieutenant Commander Walsh, approaching from the bridge. Fast-moving vessel matching the description of the Marina del Rey. Approximately 15 miles ahead. Current course consistent with Isla de los Secretos. Marcus nodded, adrenaline beginning to flow. "What's the plan?" "Mexican authorities have granted permission for interception in their waters. We'll deploy a boarding team once we're in position." Walsh glanced down at Shadow. "Your K-9 cleared for tactical operations." "Shadow goes where I go," Marcus stated firmly. "He's more than cleared, he's essential." Walsh didn't argue. "Briefing in 5 minutes. Gear up." As the cutter closed the distance, the yacht came into view, a sleek, white vessel cutting through the water with obvious haste. Through binoculars, Marcus could make out several figures on deck, their movements suggesting they were aware of the pursuit. The boarding team assembled, 6 Coast Guard personnel in tactical gear, plus Marcus and Shadow. The plan was straightforward. Approach by rigid-hull inflatable boat, board from multiple points, secure the vessel and all occupants. Shadow sat calmly as Marcus checked his tactical vest and weapon. "This is it, boy," he murmured. "End of the line for Carson." The boarding operation began with precision. As the inflatable boat pulled alongside the yacht, the Coast Guard team deployed boarding ladders and descended in coordinated movements. Shouts of Coast Guard, "Stop your vessel," echoed across the water. Marcus followed, Shadow climbing the ladder just behind him with practiced ease. This wasn't their first maritime operation. They cleared the rail just as chaos erupted on the main deck. 2 armed men appeared from the cabin, weapons raised. The Coast Guard team responded immediately, returning fire as they sought cover behind deck equipment. Marcus and Shadow separated, flanking to the port side to establish a secondary position. "Shadow find," Marcus commanded, giving the signal to search for hidden persons. The dog immediately began working the deck, nose active as he moved methodically toward the lower cabin entrance. Gunfire continued to exchange as Marcus provided covering fire for Shadow's advance. The dog paused at the cabin door, his posture indicating someone was inside. With a hand signal from Marcus, Shadow backed away, allowing the tactical team to approach. The door burst open, and a man emerged, weapon raised. Before he could fire, Shadow launched forward, taking him down with precision. The man screamed as Shadow's powerful jaws clamped onto his arm, forcing him to drop his weapon. "Clear this level," Marcus ordered as he moved to secure the suspect Shadow had subdued. "Shadow release." The dog immediately obeyed, backing away but remaining vigilant. As the tactical team cleared the upper cabins, Marcus and Shadow descended to the lower deck. The narrow passageway was dimly lit, with multiple doors leading to various compartments. Shadow moved ahead, checking each space with focused determination. At the end of the passageway, Shadow stopped at a closed door, his body language changing dramatically. His hackles raised, and a low growl emanated from deep in his throat, the same reaction he'd shown at the warehouse, just before the ambush. Marcus approached cautiously, signaling to the Coast Guard officer who had followed them down. "Someone's in there," he whispered, "and they're ready for us." The officer nodded, raising his radio to call for backup. Before he could speak, the door exploded outward, knocked off its hinges by a powerful kick. In the same instant, Shadow launched forward, intercepting the figure that emerged, a tall, lean man with cold eyes that Marcus immediately recognized from countless briefing photos. Carson. The drug lord had a pistol, but Shadow's impact threw off his aim. The shot went wide, splintering would near Marcus's head. Shadow and Carson crashed to the floor, the dog's jaws finding purchase on the man's shoulder. Carson yelled in pain, struggling to bring his weapon to bear on the animal attacking him. Marcus lunged forward, kicking the gun from Carson's hand before the man could fire. "Don't move," he commanded, his own weapon trained on Carson's head. "It's over." Carson's eyes burned with hatred as Shadow maintained his hold, growling menacingly. "You have no idea what you've done," he spat. "I know exactly what I've done," Marcus replied coldly. "Shadow, hold." The command kept the dog in position while allowing Marcus to secure Carson with handcuffs. As additional Coast Guard personnel arrived to take custody of Carson, Marcus crouched beside Shadow, rubbing the dog's ears gratefully. "Good boy," he murmured. "The best partner anyone could ask for." Shadow's amber eyes met his, filled with the simple, unquestioning loyalty that had saved Marcus's life multiple times. In that moment, no words were needed, just a profound connection between a man and a dog who would do anything to protect him. 6 months later, Marcus stood at a podium, cameras flashing as reporters gathered for the press conference. Shadow sat beside him, resplendent in a ceremonial K9 vest adorned with the medal he had just received, the department's highest honor for a police dog. "Detective Reeves, can you describe Shadow's role in bringing down the Carson cartel?" A reporter called out. Marcus looked down at his partner, who sat with dignified attentiveness despite the commotion. Shadow did what he was trained to do, and then went beyond that. He protected his handler, followed his instincts, and showed the kind of courage we should all aspire to. Marcus smiled. In many ways, he was the true detective in this case. Later, away from the cameras and crowds, Marcus sat on his back porch, watching as Shadow explored the yard in the fading evening light. His shoulder had finally healed, though it still ached when rain was coming. The Carson case had led to over 50 arrests, the dismantling of 3 drug manufacturing operations, and the seizure of almost $30 million in assets. Carson himself was facing multiple life sentences, his empire in ruins. Shadow returned to the porch, settling beside Marcus's chair with a contented sigh. Marcus reached down to stroke the dog's head, feeling the strong connection that had been forged through danger and unwavering trust. "You know something, Shadow?" Marcus said softly. "They call it a partnership, but it's more than that. It's a promise to protect each other, to never give up, to face whatever comes together." Shadow looked up at him, amber eyes reflecting the sunset. "And it's a promise you've never broken." Shadow rested his chin on Marcus's knee, and in the peaceful quiet of the evening, man and dog shared the silent understanding that some bonds transcend words. They're written in loyalty, courage, and the unspoken language of true connection. The end.